Hello and welcome to Trauma-Informed Care. This training is a collaborative effort between Community Action Partnership, Hunger Free Lancaster County, and the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank.
The contributors of this training are listed on the slide here. My name is Megan Zook, and I will be one of your guides for the short training today.
And my name is Laura Whitaker Escobar. Let's get started.
In today's training, we will cover the following topics. We will define and explain trauma and trauma-informed care in the first part of the training. And in the second part of the training, we will discuss reframing. And there will also be 3 realistic food pantry examples of reframing that will help everyone working and volunteering at food pantries or food assistance sites. So we're going to start off the training with just a reminder from our Understanding Trauma training. So this reminder is the definition of trauma, and it is that individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being.
In today's training and future trainings, we'll be talking about trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care is an approach in the human services field that assumes that an individual is more likely than not to have a history of trauma. Trauma-informed care recognizes the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role trauma may play in an individual's life, including service staff. This type of care is incorporated into nonprofits, hospitals, schools, and any other place that works with individuals who may be vulnerable, or individuals seeking social assistance. We can explain trauma-informed care using 4 R's. An organization that practices trauma-informed care realizes that trauma is widespread and recovery is possible. They recognize signs and symptoms of trauma. They respond using trauma-informed care policies that are integrated into practices, procedures, and programming. And finally, they resist. They resist re-traumatization so as to cause harm or make an individual feel like they won't want to return for services. We'll break these down in the future slides.
I hope by now that you realize that people coming to food pantries or food assistance sites may have had something traumatic happen to them in their life. That is the first R. The second R in trauma-informed care is recognizing signs of trauma in food pantries. These signs look similar to the signs of dysregulation. This slide lists some signs of trauma at pantries, including lining up hours in advance and having difficulty understanding or answering questions at pantries, even if language is not an issue. There are other examples too. Our best advice is to not be judgmental of behavior that might seem confusing or seem out of the ordinary. That could just be how someone who has experienced trauma is reacting in the moment. So we can realize and recognize trauma in the settings of food pantries and food assistance sites. What can we do to provide individuals with an experience that makes them feel better and not worse when they leave our pantries? On this slide is a graphic from the University of Buffalo. Here are 5 examples of areas to focus on in your pantries. These examples are pretty straightforward, but the bottom line of all of them is helpful for understanding what the practice would look like at your pantry. So for promoting safety, the bottom line here is having common areas that are welcoming and privacy that is respected. Then for choice, the bottom line is individuals are provided a clear and appropriate message about their rights and responsibilities. For collaboration, individuals are provided a significant role in planning and evaluating services. For trustworthiness, respectful and professional boundaries are maintained. And finally, for empowerment, providing an atmosphere that allows individuals to feel validated and affirmed with each and every contact at the agency or at the food pantry.
Lastly, with a trauma-informed care pantry, we want to avoid re-traumatization. We can do this by practicing reframing, so as to challenge our assumptions of the neighbors that we serve. This leads to better overall treatment and flow. Reframing is critical to adopt. It's very easy to assume a neighbor may be acting rude or non-compliant if we are surprised by their behavior in the food pantry. If you focus on the idea that a neighbor is disruptive or acting out of malice without practicing reframing, you can lead yourself to larger issues and overall harm of further traumatizing a neighbor or disrupting services overall. Let's turn to some examples that you are likely to encounter in the food pantry, and maybe you have already. On the surface, it may seem that a neighbor is hoarding food or taking more than their fair share if they're taking a few extra items. But applying the reframe approach, we would be considering all the reasons why this may be happening. It might be this neighbor did not know that the item was restricted. They could only take a certain number of items. Maybe they've attended a different food pantry where policies allowed for individuals to take different numbers of items. Maybe there is a lack of good and clear signage in the food pantry. It's also possible that there's a language barrier for the neighbor or that they might really be in need of that item. So, to avoid re traumatization, what would you do in that circumstance? Gently inquire about the neighbor's selection and quantity. It helps preventing making assumptions. And ask yourself if you can make an assumption based on the neighbor's response. If not, then gently explain why the item is limited and allow the neighbor to place the item back on the shelf. Do not take it from them.
Here's another example of how to use reframing to avoid re-traumatization. So in this scenario, neighbors are lining up unnecessarily early, in your opinion, outside of a food pantry door. So first, let's reframe. Let's consider all the reasons why this is happening, or this may be happening. Maybe many neighbors have been to your food pantry or other food pantries where food runs out or the selection of food is different from the beginning to the end of the food pantry. So they want to line up early to get the first choice, first selection, and to make sure they get food. Also, maybe showing up early is one way that a neighbor can possibly control a small part of their day. That could lead into the first reason that I just stated or another reason entirely. So the neighbor just might feel better lining up in advance. So to avoid re-traumatization, why don't you meet with your team to discuss ways to help neighbors feel like they don't need to line up so early? One idea could be to offer appointments and ensure that you have ordered enough food so all neighbors have the same selection regardless of appointment time. Additionally, and this isn't listed on the slide, making sure that you are open for the entire time that your pantry states that it's going to be open is how you can make sure that people don't feel like they need to all come at the very beginning of your food pantry. If you establish and continue to stay open for the entire time, people will come to understand that they can come throughout the duration of your pantry instead of at the beginning. So the final example of reframing to avoid re-traumatization is that a neighbor is driving a really nice car to come and receive food, and maybe the volunteers and the staff have noticed and they're starting to form some internal judgments. Maybe they're talking to each other about this nice car. But let's reframe to avoid re-traumatization here. So by reframing, we should consider all the reasons why this neighbor could be driving this car. Maybe their family member is helping them helping them by letting them borrow their car. Maybe they have a loaner while their car is in the shop. But at the end of the day, the real reason is not important. They wouldn't need to come for food if they didn't need to. So to avoid re-traumatization, treat the neighbor with empathy, kindness, patience, and offer them all the same things that every other neighbor is offered when they come to receive food.
In reframing how we approach our food pantry operations, we're able to reflect on the roles that we play within the food pantry as volunteers, staff members, and individuals who offer services. Overall, we want to move away from power dynamics and any practices that exert control over neighbors. Seesaw where we're on a higher level than neighbors. This would look like knowing what's best for them, making decisions for them, and not allowing them to have a voice. Instead, we want to have a position on the same level as neighbors, asking them what they want, allowing them to decide on things like food choices of their own, and providing opportunities so that they can provide input into operations. We'll end this training with a quote from Sherry Mead, an important mental health advocate. She says, "There are no static roles of helper and helpee. Reciprocity is the key to building natural community connections." Thank you for taking this training on trauma-informed care. In the following trainings, we'll be discussing other examples on how you can provide best practices within food pantries, including things that we've learned so far, so that our food pantries are safe environments on a social level and on the physical built level.